We are back at it with another solo Q&A. This is episode 209 of the podcast, and I have about 31 questions to work through. And I want to explore some really interesting topics this time around. You guys really outdid yourselves with the questions sent through on the email list and on my Instagram question box. And we're going to dive right in with question number 1. Do you prefer the carrot or the stick to motivate you? I think I am a positive person, and that would mean that I would strive towards the carrot being the motivator for me. However, working towards goals rather than running away from something seems like a really noble thing, but discomfort and wanting to escape from a bad situation is undoubtedly more powerful driver for the vast majority of people. And I think if I look at my life, I am very process driven and I have goals, I have ambitions. But when you want to move away from pain, you will work that little bit harder and that little bit faster. And I often use this Jordan Peterson insight on an experiment that he talks about with rats, where rats were starved and they were put into a box with a coil on their tail to measure how hard they would pull. And they wafted the smell of food in front of them, and they measured how hard the rats pulled towards the food, which is towards the goal. They then did a second run of the experiment where the rats were starved, but instead of just the food smell in front of them for them to pull towards, they also wafted the smell of a cat behind them, so something to pull away from. And the rats, inevitably, as you would expect, they pulled harder because they were running away from something and towards something else. So when you think about this in your own life, and I think about it in mine, you need to be working towards something, but you need to be getting away from something as well. Create an enemy, create discomfort, create things that you're getting away from, and you will work harder. That's just how it works. I think tapping into both the carrot and the stick is a really valuable way to motivate and move yourself forward. Question number 2, how's your evening and morning routine looking these days? Evenings being a touch looser than I would like, but in an ideal world, I want to be screen free and digital free about 9 o'clock. And then I want to be reading, journaling, doing the bathroom, and then getting myself to sleep probably around 10 o'clock at the latest, so that I'm getting up nice and early and I'm feeling great. Because as anyone that has used Whoop, albeit I don't use that, you should know that 8 hours in bed does not equal 8 hours of sleep. So you want to be trying to clock as many hours in bed as possible to give yourself the best possible chance of, even if you operate at a 80 to 90% efficiency of the number of hours of sleep you have in terms of quality sleep, that's still not going to hit your 8 hours unless you're in bed for 8 to 10 hours, which is a long time and a lot to commit to. So I try and get to bed as early as possible because I really am a much more of a morning person. I will say that my evenings have been a little bit looser and I've been working a little bit later on screens because of, one, a very busy period in my day job, and two, building the podcast course on the side of still maintaining a once a week upload frequency on the podcast, and occasionally throwing in a second one, as you saw the other week when I had Robert Twigger and Julie Gunner in the same week. Morning is pretty solid. I feel pretty good about it at the moment. I will say that the darker mornings as we come into October in Scotland have made it more challenging to get out of bed, and I am going to look at like sunrise alarm clocks or some sort of light, like not a sad lamp, but maybe something like that to support with waking up and feeling a little bit fresher, because it is still dark when I'm getting up about 6, half 6. So the main thing I do in the morning is I wake up, bathroom, I hydrate and I take my supplements. I journal quickly I'm still using the 6-minute diary, and that primarily is me putting down what I'm grateful for the day, what my intentions are, and what a good day will look like, and my positive affirmation. I then do a tiny bit of foam roller work with some resistance bands to work on my shoulder and any of the kind of tightness that I get in that regard, and then I go for a walk. Ideally, I stay off my phone until I'm on my walk, but something has crept in because of how busy my emails have been, both with work and for the podcast, and my DMs on Instagram with feedback on the podcast, which I really appreciate, by the way. I've been checking that before I'm going out the walk, which I think in an ideal world I shouldn't do, because you leave yourself undisturbed and unimpacted by the rest of the world until you've started to serve yourself. So that's something that I'll try and crack down on a little bit, but that's kind of what it looks like. I am fitting in an ice bath at the end of my walk twice a week. I would love for that to be more often, but it's not as convenient because I can't keep it at my flat on the balcony or outside there because it's a communal area. I keep it at my parents' house, which is about a 10-minute walk from the flat, and then I have to use their shower afterwards to obviously get ready after having an ice bath. So I would do it more often if it was more convenient, and I think that would be a great addition to the morning routine. Number 3, are there any specific steps you took to progress your corporate career after moving industries? There was another question that was very similar to this as well, and it was 3 tips you'd give someone to help them move up the corporate ladder, and I'm going to tackle both at once. So the first question focuses on me moving industries. That was around May 2021. I moved from the insurance industry to the furniture industry. I would say in terms of like progressing and being a success in this new industry, I had a pre-existing excellent ability to prospect new clients, sell to them, and win business. This was crafted when I was working in insurance long before I moved into furniture. And specifically in terms of how I leveled up once moving into this industry, I improved my product knowledge. I think you can bring your sales skill set, but if you don't know what you're talking about, you lose a lot of credibility. So I delved deep on interior design, furniture. I looked at the company that I worked for and the service I was offering, the products, and I started to get a really good understanding so that I could speak the language and use the terms that customers used and also navigate things internally. I took a lot of time to understand what clients look for in terms of the service they want and the different needs and the different types of orders that they place. One of the things I really, really focused on was understanding the most profitable products that we sold that had the best margins, as well as what customers spent the most money on annually. That for me, actually, for a lot of my clients, it was mattresses and desk chairs that universities and purpose-built student accommodation buy a lot of. And that gives you, when you understand that, that gives you a really good idea of what type of business you want to try and win and bring in and the deals you actively want to do. But in terms of progressing your career, I'm going to break this down into like 3 steps as per the kind of second question, which was, what did the chap say? He said 3 tips you'd give someone to help them move up the corporate ladder. So number 1 for moving up the corporate ladder is work hard first and smart later. It's really in vogue to say that working smart is all that matters, but that's wrong. So many people that are giving you that advice, they are giving you that from a place of progress already and a place of privilege. And it's wrong, because if you want to accomplish anything meaningful, you have to start by working hard. You need to build a reputation for hard work and you need to take pride in it, and that will build up over time. You can start to use the leverage that you get from working hard to then work smart. If you don't build a base, a reputation, you're not going to get the opportunities in the future. The early days in your career are not that different from entrepreneurs and businesses. You have to put in place the foundations. Previous guest Sahil Bloom actually speaks about this, and he said, leverage is earned, not found. So you need to earn the leverage by working hard and getting a reputation as a hard worker. And a lot of successful people that did the hard yards and they are in that position where they're really successful now, they're preaching about working smart and having balance, but that's only once they get to certain levels and they forget those early days. So do not take for granted the value of working hard and being seen as somebody that does that. Second, take care of yourself and your well-being. And I mean that in terms of internally and externally. I function at my best when I feel good and I look good. When I'm training, when I'm sleeping well, when I'm eating well, these all contribute to my confidence, the energy, the aura that I bring to work. And for me, it enables me to be a positive, enthusiastic force who brings great energy and is nice to be around. I'll be realistic with colleagues, of course, and I won't be like a pie-in-the-sky dreamer. When I recognize challenges, that's important, but I also want to work towards a solution. I come into meetings and team gatherings as a force of good, and I can only do that when I'm taking care of how I am and how I show up. Being at my own best in terms of my physical, my mental health, it enables me to do that. And best believe in the modern world, in the working environment, that stands out. That makes me a top 1%er performer, which you can do the exact same just by looking after yourself, your body, and your mind. The third thing I'll talk about is one of the biggest determinants in your career is actually knowing your worth. It's really vital to understand what you bring to the table, and that's probably something that will come later in the time after you've done the hard work, after you've made sure you look after yourself, after you understand the sector that you're working and what you can bring to the table. And many of you enjoyed the episode with Dr. Julie Gurner, and she wrote in her newsletter recently, and I literally copied and pasted this into my notes when I read it because I was like, that is perfect for like what I want to think about. You know who you are, what you can do. Why would you shy away from this? And this is a great framework. It doesn't make you a jerk. I know it's American. It doesn't make you a jerk to be comfortable and confident in your own abilities and your own skin. Remember, there's a difference between confidence and arrogance. Don't overstep that line. Humility, though, leads people to confuse the former with the latter. And instead of helping them to grow, it often keeps people small. So if you're too humble and too unwilling to talk about your success and what you can do, it will keep you small. Humility can lead so many people to hiding themselves away, keeping their head down, waiting for others to recognize their abilities and greatness, and usually ending up watching as people who are quote unquote less talented lap them, overtake them time and time again. If you want other people to recognize your worth, start by owning it yourself. For me, in your career and your corporate life, you need to recognize what you bring to the table, understand your value, and communicate it. Back it up and show evidence relentlessly that you are the person that you say you are, and you'll be paid accordingly within the structure. And I've really noticed that over the last little while, where I've been speaking within the business about my ability to bring in new business and new customers and new revenue. And I haven't just spoken about it, I've showed it, and it shows that you're a valuable employee and people recognize that. As a little bit of a bonus one, I will also say that you need to understand the numbers. And this was something that I recently really learned for applying it in my own role. And I've spoken to a number of friends who have seen how this has helped them progress as well. But in any business, revenue, profit really matter. And as an employee, if you understand what your role is, what your team does, what your product and your service contributes to the revenue and to the profit, it'll make you a much more important team member, because people appreciate how much you understand about the business and what your role within it is. So it's important that you understand where you are in the bigger picture and what it is. Well, for example, what is the bigger picture on a monthly, a quarterly, and annually basis, and what are the trends versus previous years? How are your team performing versus previous years? And this is not just in terms of sales. Like, I'm working in a sales function, so it's really easy for me to do. But you can do this in any area of the business to understand what you're contributing, what it means to the bottom line and to the profit. It's really helpful information, and you can base your decisions around how the business is behaving and what the wider business is doing, and it will help you understand what's happening, and it will even allow you to be more senior and advise and comment on what's happening with the business, some of those trends. And by you understanding that, you just demonstrate that you're somebody that's highly capable. Question number 4, what would you have done more, better, different, less of if you could restart? If this is about life, that is so deep and really searching, so I'm going to give it a go. I certainly think I would have taken more risk, particularly in my teens and early 20s, with experiences, and it would have helped me build more life insights. I definitely focused on a lot of things in my early years that didn't need as much time and attention. I maybe should have dialed into some other more unique things, and I held myself back a little bit. And if I'd been more willing to just be myself in the version I am now and what I wanted to achieve and what I wanted to do, I would have been so much better off. In terms of what I would do better, I would be better at networking even earlier. It's absolutely one of my biggest skills nowadays, and it started being something that I was really quite good at from around 2017 when I was creating content with CamBros online. But if I'd done that earlier, I would be in an even stronger position now. In terms of what I would do differently, I'd have created content earlier, and that probably links to that last one, because I was forced to network because I was creating content and I wanted to distribute it and meet the people that were also creating content. So if I'd done that earlier, that would have been better, including the podcast. What would I do less of? I would be less scared of being entirely myself, and instead would have opted in, like by doing things like creating content with things that I just wanted to do personally, and opting out and refusing to do the average things that normal people are considered to do, to fit in with people I didn't even fucking like and didn't really care what they thought. But I was adhering to societal norms and doing the things they wanted to do and attending those things. I will say I was a strong character, and I did drive to a lot of events where people were drinking, and I decided I didn't want to, and I knew I could still have fun and enjoy myself without drinking. But there were still loads of things that I did that were just in line with what was expected, and hung about with people that I didn't really have a lot of time for. So I would do less of that if I was to restart again. If I answer this question from like a podcast perspective, because I think that might be interesting for people, I would 100% do more in podcasts, in person podcasts. There we go, fumbling over myself. I would have done more studio and in-person podcasts sooner. The challenge was I started during the kind of most strict conditions of the lockdowns, but there were still opportunities for me to do some in person sooner than I did. So particularly for Scottish-based guests, I should have tried to get like a setup that I could do even if studios weren't reopened during the lockdowns. And alongside that, what would I have done better? I would have done better quality video production and promo material from the very start. And that would have increased my reach to new listeners. And it would also give the ability for my guest to share the content they created together to promote their appearance. And then I would permeate and penetrate their audience and have grown the podcast a lot faster. In terms of what I would have done differently, I would have had a different start date. I would have started earlier. I would have started recording in the summer of 2019 when the fire first was really lit around podcasting, and not waited till March 2020 when it locked down. In terms of what I would do less of with the podcast, I can't really think what I would do less of. Like, if anything, it's like I would have just dialed everything up and just improved it. I don't think there's anything to take away. Number 5, how do you navigate friendships that end up transitioning into business relationships as well as friends? I think this falls into 3 things. You need to compartmentalize that. You need to have boundaries and you need to have respect. There are some types of friends that you wouldn't even dream of going into business with because you just know the potential clashes that are going to come down the line. Whereas others, there's probably, you know, that you could have a business and not let it impact the wider areas just based on their personality. But these types of friendships are probably rarer and further apart. I actually think you could end up becoming friends with a business partner who you start a business with on a purely business basis. But and equally, there's absolutely friends that I have that I talk about business with, but you would need to do it consciously. And one of the terms you used in your question was end up. And that sounds as if it's just drifted into a business relationship rather than a friendship. And as I said, there's plenty of friends that I've spoken about business. There's friends that have sponsored the podcast and invested in that. But I wouldn't have progressed it unless we were both fully on the same page. And I think if I think about future businesses that I might start with friends or have friends involved in, we need to be completely aligned on the short, medium, and long term. We need to understand the direction of the business, the time commitment it's going to take from both of us, the responsibilities we're each going to have, the investments we're going to make from a fiscal perspective, from a time perspective, and also the goals and the aims in terms of, is it something that we're going to build up and sell? Is it something that we're going to build up and work on forever? What is the plan with it? And I think that helps you. I think doing everything consciously gives you so much more time, and making sure you compartmentalize in terms of you have times where you talk business and times when you go back to being friends during your life and your time with them. Question number 6. The average millionaire has 7 sources of income. Do you believe you should focus more on diversifying income sources or scaling the current ones? The man who chases 2 rabbits catches none, etc. Great addition to that question as well. I've said before that it's irresponsible to have just one income stream. And long-term listeners will know that I spoke about a completely uncontrollable company-wide redundancy that I experienced in 2019. It was actually the first ever solo episode that I did, number 15, and I spoke about that situation. And that taught me that it's pretty important to have some diverse revenue streams. And if I look at what it's like in 2023 for me, it's my day job, which continues to be the main contributor to my income, but it's also my investment portfolio across stocks, shares, crypto. It's the property that I own, albeit it is a relative liability because there's a mortgage on it. But then it's also my Instagram, my podcast, and I've done sales coaching and consulting as well as a separate business, which has earned me revenue too. I will be adding to my revenue, but it's actually already within the realms and the streams I've talked about there. So things like the podcast masterclass will be within that. Things like the sponsorship that the podcast has, that will increase, and that will all be within it. So it's still the same number of streams, but just deeper and harder, because I always warn against going wide and shallow, because if you go too wide, you never allow yourself the opportunity to scale to any really noticeable income in any of the streams. So in my day job, I've pushed really hard over the last couple of years, and I've doubled my income since moving industries, literally doubled it. And it might be even more than that, depending on what happens with my commission and my bonuses towards the end of this year. But I've also invested really heavily in assets and stocks and crypto during that time, as well as growing this podcast and the related current and future streams that are related to that to a really noticeable extent. And I would still say that's relatively narrow, at least narrow enough for me to go deep and see progress in those areas and not feel like I'm spread too thin and spinning too many plates and running between different things. But it's still wide enough that I'm like, touch wood, that doesn't happen. But if I was to go through a redundancy or lose my job, or say the podcast, I couldn't be monetized at all, I'm not reliant on just one thing. Number 7, you've interviewed people you look up to. What's your thoughts on don't meet your heroes? Don't meet your heroes. It's a really strange proverb. It's always puzzled me when I've heard that, as people like that say that they expect you to be disappointed in the reality of what your heroes are like versus the expectations that you have as this kind of figure that you hold up. I don't think I've experienced that. And in the episodes where I've interviewed the people that I really have looked up to, I've actually really liked those people. And of course, there's been guests that I've been interested in advance, and maybe they've not impressed me as much as I thought they would when I was planning the episode, when I was excited about it. But that's completely counterbalanced by the people that I really, really looked up to. And I've ended up like staying in touch with them, or I've ended up becoming quite friendly with them, or I've ended up just being, wow, like delighted to have had like an hour and a half or 2 hours of their time. So the main examples, if I was thinking like young Colin and his heroes and people he looked up to, particularly probably Joe Delaney and Rob Lipsett. And then of course, more recently, when I was a little bit older, I looked up to Chris Williamson a lot, and I've interviewed all three of those people, and I'd watched hours of their content over the years, especially Joe. In my early 20s, I was watching so much Joe Delaney. So to interview him and have him on the show, get on well, and meeting him as a hero to me when I was growing up, that was a great thing, and I don't have any regrets on that at all. I guess just pick your heroes really carefully and meet them in the circumstances that you would want to, and you won't, that kind of don't meet your heroes won't come true. Question number 8. Do you think podcasts could reach platforms like Netflix? Where do you see them going in the future as a market? Podcasting is still so young. It's still so early. There's been like bumps of when podcasts and numbers of people creating podcasts has spiked, particularly 2020 when I started. There were so many starting, a lot of them fell away. And there's been another spike again recently because I think people are waking up to the value of the platform. And if you look at what podcasting is being distributed on at the moment, they're now even like on airline in-flight entertainment. So like BA has Diary of a CEO, and I think Modern Wisdom is ending up on one of the airlines. I'm not sure which one, but that's how like mainstream podcasting is becoming. So when I see brands like Spotify and distributing platforms like YouTube really heavily investing in podcasting as a medium, it's only going to get scaled, and it could end up anywhere. It maybe could end up on Netflix, but there's no reason that highly produced video podcasts would end up on there, because I think they would need to be of a particular standard to want to be watched rather than just a conversation, an audio spectacle. I looked this up, and there's actually something like, I think the stat was, there we go, 464.7 million podcast listeners globally in 2023. And it's predicted, based on the trend and the number of uptake and the number of subscribers that are growing on a monthly basis, by 2024, it's going to be 504.9 million. So an extra, 50 odd million people. That's absolutely huge. That's basically the size of the UK. Now, these people, they might be listening to fewer podcasts, and it might be a monopoly. So like all those 50 million listeners might become listeners to Joe Rogan or Andrew Schultz or Modern Wisdom or Diary of a CEO. But I don't think it will be quite like that. I think those listeners will be distributed to quality podcasts across the kind of top 1%, probably top 2%, top 3%. I think it will still be like a kind of cream of the crop situation with podcasts, but I think they'll still be distributed to the good quality shows, and it won't just be like one or two that get all the benefits. Question number 9, you are aware of imposter syndrome, but despite this, do you feel imposter syndrome for offering a product even though that product can offer value? Complicated wording to that question, but I do follow what it means. I think imposter syndrome, when doing something you've never done before, something new, should actually be present to some extent. It's a good check and measure that you understand that you're doing something different and you're pushing the boundaries of what you've done previously. And having those doubts there to quell and overcome and push past is absolutely fine. And you just need to give yourself proof and validation of what you're about to do and show yourself that you're capable of it. I think this question is referring directly to my podcast masterclass course, which I've announced on previous introductions for the show. It's the first product that I've directly created and produced, like by me individually, rather than me being an affiliate for a company or a product or a service that somebody else is, and I'm promoting it. So there's obviously an element of that being new to me, but I don't feel like an imposter about that. It's something that people ask me about a lot. I've done some one-to-one consultancy on it, so there's a proof of concept. I've explained podcasting is going to grow in that previous question. How much knowledge I've built from the last 3 years is really, really incredible. And it's not just knowledge, it's action knowledge that I've put in to grow a show like this one. And I know what I would do differently. I know what I would do better. I know exactly how somebody should start, the equipment they should use, the frameworks, the processes, the systems. And me taking the time to distill those lessons down is really valuable. It's going to save people time. It's going to save people money. It's going to save people energy when they want to build their show. So I feel like I'm a really good communicator as well. And how I've set up the course as a video a video course is, it's really easy to follow, and it leaves somebody in a position where they go through the modules. It's like 54 videos from to watch, notes and templates that they can use and copy. And all they have to do is just take action, implement the frameworks, implement the process, implement the systems. And if they've got the passion and the work ethic, they're going to succeed. So for me, there's no imposter syndrome about the content or the package that I'm putting forward, because there's proof of concept and validation from who I am as an individual. The only doubt and the only thing that lingers in my head is how much, like, can I charge for this? And what would the volume of uptake be? Because it's not going to be, there's no problem at all with the quality and the knowledge, but it'll just be how many people do it. Like, I don't know yet. Do I have the distribution channels to push it out there to enough people that are interested in that? We'll find out. Question number 10, where do you see yourself being in 5 years' time? Physically, mentally, careers, relationships, and what's your plan to get there? Yeah, some deep questions today. I find it really hard to envisage this sometimes. I don't have brilliant foresight of what the future is going to look like. If we were to really go into that, I will try. So I'll be 35 in 5 years' time, maybe just after 36. And I think at that point in time, there's probably even more societal expectations on things that I should and shouldn't be doing or have achieved or done. And if I'm going to take each in turn, if I start with physically, I still plan at 35, 36 years old to still be in ruthless physical condition, to still be training well, to still be well built, to still have a high level physique. Because if I was to lose that part of my identity and that part of my lifestyle, then I'd be so disappointed. I would have clearly dropped off a lot of the habits and values which I actively enjoy and know are truly important to me. So physically, that's going to be a box I'm still going to be ticking. Mentally, I fully expect to still being curious to learn about new elements and to progress and be a better version of myself, and to be having great discussions that interest me, while being able to share the things that I'm learning with my audience and those around me and support them. I also expect, from a mental perspective, to be happy and stimulated by the activities that I'm undertaking on a daily basis. If I'm not doing that, then you're not living life properly. From a career perspective, that's probably one of the hardest ones, because things change so quickly, especially with all the different things that I'm experimenting with and pushing into now. But what I do know is I suspect whatever I'm doing will center around a number of things: speaking, presenting, listening, providing valuable insights and solutions. Those are my core skills. So it would make total sense for me to be applying those for me making a living. From a relationship perspective, if I meet a girl that's right for me and I'm right for her, then I would probably at that stage be dating longer term. I might be engaged to them, I might be married. Things can move really fast when you find the right person and it works for you. So that would be where I expect on that strand of things. The plan to get to those different areas, I think this is where I fall back to being incredibly focused on the daily processes that I adopt. And as long as those align to my values and tick those boxes and don't deviate me from the path, which are those kind of 4 or 5 things that we've named off, then I'll be happy. So whether that's how I train, what I eat, the content I consume, the content that I create, the conversations that I'm having, the people I'm spending time with and I'm being around, the places that I go and the events that I go to, these will all take me down a path where in 5 years' time, the ideas I've spoken about there are a reality, or at least they're extremely likely to be a reality, or a version of them that I'm happy with will be the reality. Question 11 is actually a follow-up to this one. Do you think it's imperative to have a well thought out and actionable plan for all aspects of your future? Do you believe in seeing how things pan out for some areas? I think a plan for all aspects, probably not. But I am a bit of an advocate of knowing the processes, as I've just mentioned there, that you need to follow, and making sure that those are in alignment with the general direction of travel. So I was saying there that if I follow the things that I'm talking about with my training, my eating, my content, my curiosities, the conversations I'm having, the people I'm spending time with, I'm going to end up somewhere in the right direction. And that also means that I eliminate habits and actions and activities which are in contrast. So if things take me away from that, then those need to come out because it shouldn't serve me. So easy ones for me, I have pretty much no desire to just be like out drinking on a weekly basis or even remotely regularly. Like I think I drank on holiday this year. I haven't drank in the UK in well over 18 months, and it doesn't serve any of my goals where I want to be physically, mentally, career-wise, relationship-wise. And in the same way, if I give another example, someone might say they've got a really strict physical focus at this moment in time, but if they're eating 3 takeaways a week, that is out of alignment in terms of their actions and their habits. And if we go deeper from maybe like a business or a career perspective, you see people say all the time, oh, I want progression, I want growth. But so often that's actually just a platitude and an empty statement, especially if one of your values and your future ambitions might be around relationships and family time. that could be in contrast. It could be a clash. So if you're expanding the responsibilities and the time that it takes you in your career and your business, you need to consider if that means that it's sabotaging another area of your life that you've told that's important. So I don't think the kind of end of the question was seeing how things pan out. That's very much not like me, and I don't really believe in that. But having too rigid a plan is also not me. I just know the things that I'm doing will hopefully put me in the right direction towards where I want to be. Question number 12. What are your biggest points of frustration in your current life? I can tell you right now in Glasgow during October and for several months that we've got coming up over autumn and winter, it's the heavy rain and wind. One or the other. So like rain by itself or wind by itself, not too bad. But for getting outside and moving and enjoying myself first thing in the morning, it is getting pretty unpleasant. And we've actually bought like one of those walking treadmills for the flat that you can fold out and plug in. So we'll see if that's a way to alleviate the pain of that. But if I was to be a bit more specific than just the weather, which I think a lot of people can say is a big frustration for them, it's actually just the storage on my MacBook at the moment. Like it's slowing down so much and I'm having to drag and move the storage of a lot of the videos that I've got onto an external hard drive storage, because the videos for the podcast masterclass are seriously big in terms of the gigabytes. So it's been quite a lot of admin to do that without the laptop crashing. And that's been a frustrating time spent because it's really just admin and it's just a necessary evil and it doesn't really make the boat go faster. So those are some frustrations that get me a bit annoyed at the moment. Number 13, what's the kindest thing someone has done for you? I feel this is something that's an accumulation of kindness rather than one specific single act. I would say the love and the support of my mum and what she gives and supports my brother with is just consistent, relentless giving and kindness. She does absolutely everything she can to help us. So shout out to Lady Campbell. She's an amazing woman and she is incredibly kind to my brother and I. Number 14, if you could be a professional in which sport, what would it be and why? It's going to have to be a striker for Rangers Football Club, like my grandpa. I think why? Just want to score goals for Rangers. It's in my heritage. I care deeply about Rangers, and I know the impact that doing well for the club would have on so many thousands of people who care so deeply as well. And like I can just imagine the feeling of scoring for them in an important game, an Old Firm or a European game. That would be next level. Number 15, do you have ambitions to split time between the UK and Dubai still? It's really difficult. I think like ambitions is like a strong word. I think the prospect is really cool. And depending on what my income streams were like, that would be a distinct possibility. And being in Dubai longer than I think at the moment in time, what it's going to look like is me working there remotely for a few days, and then the rest of the time being me spending my annual leave allowance on being on holiday there, especially during the Scottish winter. So that would probably be the plan. So I think if you look at this winter coming up, I'm probably going to be there 3 to 4 weeks maximum, just based on work commitments and the time that I actually physically need to be in the UK. Number 16, a bit of a silly one. Would you rather a tiny body or a huge head? I think for me, it's going to be a huge head. I've already got quite a big head, but metaphorically and physically. Because I think if you had a big head, you could just work really hard on getting really jacked to try and balance out a little bit. But if you had like a tiny body and a really rubbish rig, that's not going to be much fun. Number 17, how do you deal with authority in your corporate role? Lots of high agency people I know couldn't work for someone else. How do you manage it? That's a really interesting point. I hadn't even thought of that. I think a lot of the people I'm friendly with are entrepreneurial by their nature nowadays. And even those people that I know that work in an organization, they have that kind of entrepreneur personality that I actually spoke to Paul McFadden about this in the podcast, where he was saying that he hires people that maybe don't want the risk of being an entrepreneur, but they want to be part of building something. They've got those traits, albeit they want the security of not being the boss and the be all and the end all and the fall guy. And I spend a lot of time around those people. And I'm also quite fortunate. If I look at my role, I intentionally chose a role as a sales director of one unit of a business. That means I'm heavily responsible for that area of the business. I'm responsible for the processes, the outcomes, and how it performs really. And it means that I've got a lot of authority as well as a lot of autonomy over what the day and the week looks like for me. So if I look at who I have to deal with in terms of authority, I'm online to some of the most senior people in the business. I'm online to the chief revenue officer. I report a little bit to the chief finance officer and the chief executive officer as well. And all of them are really senior and they respect what I do. They respect what I bring to the business through my new business sales, my energy, my approach, and how I behave. So I don't really clash with authority particularly often. And when I do, and I maybe disagree, I do it really respectfully. I bring data to back up my opinion and I bring suggestions and solutions of how we should do things. And I think that enables you to gain the respect of the people that you're dealing with from who are an authority and who are maybe not telling you what to do, but are giving you instructions. You need to take those instructions as respectfully as possible. And if you do disagree in a respectful manner and bring data to back up your assertions and bring solutions. Don't just throw toys at the pram. Equally, if I look at other roles that you could work in, if I was being like micromanaged and really like heavily scrutinized and looked over my shoulder, I wouldn't enjoy that. But I think you have to earn the right as an employee to have freedom and autonomy by being a high performer and consistently exceeding expectations. Or if your company just never allows that kind of energy and that kind of environment, then go and find another one that does allow you to do that. Question number 18. What evidence is presented to you recently that's changed your opinion? I am getting more and more convinced on eliminating processed foods from my diet. And I'm pushing towards having as many real whole foods, which are single ingredient, as possible. I maintain that calories are king and macros are really, really important, but the quality of food in what you put in your body reflects on how you look, of course, but also how you feel and your longer term health. That matters more and more to me. And maybe it's because my 31st birthday is on Wednesday or Tuesday, I think it's on the 10th of October. And that's around the corner. Maybe that's bringing this on as an important thing to me. But a number of my friends and my brother as well have really gone hard down this path of eating pretty much entirely unprocessed foods. And I'm watching with interest. And I've made some notable changes, but there's still some adjustments that need to come from me if I want to be, I don't want to say cleaner eating, but more whole foods. And I'm definitely being pushed in that direction. I've actually got a guest coming up. It's been recorded already. It'll come out maybe episode 214, I think it'll be, with a guy called the Really Tan Man. And he's fighting against seed oils, which are a huge part of the modern processed food. And learning what he had to say about that, albeit I think his take was quite extreme, I can see the benefits of moving towards more single ingredient, unprocessed meals and foods. And I know that many of you actually enjoyed the episode with Dr. James McElroy as well, which is in the backlog. And there's actually scope for James and I to do another episode where we will talk only about gut health and some of the actionable advice and how you can improve that through diet and intake. And that would be linked massively to that. So I've probably changed my mind a little bit and I've changed my opinion a little bit more towards the importance of the quality of the food you eat as well. Question number 19. Would you consider being a life coach? I think you'd be great at it with your perspective and mindset. Now, we talked about imposter syndrome earlier. I think that would probably apply to this one because as a general life coach, no, I don't have broad enough life experience at 30, 31 to support people across the board and like in every area of their life. Where in contrast though, like in select areas, I can absolutely help somebody. I can share my experience, my expertise, give them guidance, framework, systems. But the imposter syndrome would creep up if you were to say, oh, Colin, do you want to be a life coach to somebody who's 35 years old, has a wife and kids, and is struggling in their job? I could probably talk to them about their job, but I wouldn't want to talk to them about their wife and kids because I've not been married. I've not had kids. So I think there's always like a particular remit that somebody who holds themselves up as a life coach should operate within. And they probably have to have walked the walk or had some sort of experience in that area. And if I think about areas that I could help, I could do coaching on podcasting, on improving your sales ability, on your time management, on public speaking, and even just being a resilient and consistent operator with your body, your brain, and your business, then I'm happy to help. I've got no qualms about that. And there's scope for me to build products and services in that space because I've walked the walk and I could definitely take somebody from A to B or even take them from A to F, if not all the way to Z. So I think if you were looking at giving coaching, I would never go in with too broad a remit because I don't think I would have the required experience to justify that. Question number 20. How often are you ice bathing? Did you notice a change if you miss a dip? I mentioned earlier in my morning routine, I'm dipping twice a week with my Cal Recovery Pod. And I loop it in at the end of my morning walk where possible. And then I shower at my parents before heading back for work, or if it's a weekend, before heading on to whatever I'm up to. And it's definitely harder because it's kept to my parents and it's in their garden. And I would say I add in a dip when I'm at David Lloyd. We've got a cold plunge in the spa there, but it's nowhere near as cold as an outdoor plunge that you've got for yourself. And in terms of if I miss a dip, because it's been quite consistent in the number of times that I've dipped in the last month or two, I don't really notice that I miss it because I don't really miss it, but I certainly feel the benefit of the clarity first thing because it causes like a real burst of energy. And when you come out and your body is actually like red raw from the cold, and you push your finger into your chest and you can see like a white mark against the red skin. It's quite cool. And yeah, I think if I miss it, I definitely feel that my tolerance for doing it the next time I do it is down. It's the same as like use it or lose it. Like imagine you don't train weights for 3 weeks. When you go back, you're probably not going to hit the same number in your squat or your bench press because you've just not used that muscle in that domain for a little while. It's the same for jumping in a really cold place. You just feel it's harder the next time round, and you just feel a little bit less momentum in your day, I suppose, by not doing something hard at the start. Question number 21. How has having a brother shaped you from a developmental point of view? It's been fundamental to a lot of what I do, and hopefully Ian doesn't listen to this because he'll get too much kudos, but we're very, very close in age. He is 2.5 years younger than me, albeit it was 3 school years, and he's always been quite mature or developed, at least for his age, in many ways, in many areas. So while I was quite a small kid growing up and I was a bit of a late bloomer in my school years, this meant that the competition between us was actually really fierce and probably closer and more competitive and fair despite the age gap. Albeit as an older brother, I still had a slight advantage because there's 2.5 years, so there's still some developmental differences in the two of you in terms of size and weight and strength. My parents also instilled in us a lot of the same values, and we did a lot of the same activities growing up. So we both went to rugby, we both went to golf, we both went to the gym. We both had pretty much the same pressure on us, relatively speaking, to succeed academically and to progress in that domain. And this meant that as an older brother, I broke a lot of ground for Ian to follow. And so he was doing things at a much younger age. So he got into the gym younger, he got into golf younger. He kind of knew what university would be like younger because I'd been 3 years before him. And he tried a lot of things at a younger age, which I think was great for him. But also I had somebody to do those things with, to push me and be like a benchmark for, and to support me with that. And the other thing and one of the main differences in our personality types is Ian is a lot more experimental than me. And it means that he's tried many different approaches. I actually spoke about the diet thing there. He's been straight into that, and he was the first one in the family to count calories and count macros. So like he's good for being the use case for something and convincing me to implement it in my life. And for those that don't know, we own a flat together and we still spend a lot of time together. And there's a crossover in a number of our different friend groups too. So developmentally, we are still very closely aligned in terms of what we get up to. And there's definitely an element of pushing each other too. There's a competitiveness there that's now it isn't fighting and battling each other, but we definitely push each other. And even if we distill it down to a really like fundamental financial or materialistic expression of this, we both got our new watches and our new cars and the significant increases in income in our careers this year within weeks of each other. There became a new standard and we both just had to keep up and meet it. Otherwise, one would fall behind and feel uncomfortable. So that's quite a healthy push from a developmental perspective. Question number 2, when was the last experience you barely laughed at? I think in recent weeks, there's been a lot of gallows humour in one of my group chats with my Rangers supporting friends because we've just been so terrible from one disaster to the next. So on Thursday night, I mean, it was awful. We lost to a Cypriot team, Limassol or something like that. I mean, they're that bad, can't even pronounce them. But some of the jokes afterwards were just ruthless, and you just had to. If you didn't laugh, you'd cry. So yeah, I just laughed at that, and that had me in it comforted me with laughter rather than tears. Question number 23, and this is probably the hardest one to answer. What is an interest you have that not many have? This was asked by my friend David McIntosh, who hosts the Development with David podcast, and he said that his is stand-up comedy, and I'm not allowed to say that an interest of mine is podcasting because enough people have that. What's an interest of mine that not many people have? Well, I can't say Rangers because there's thousands of Rangers fans. I can't say the podcast. I can't say golf. What else am I interested in? I'm a bit of a sales geek. I like to listen to sales content, but there's probably a lot of people that are interested in that. I'm not into like jigsaws or like really niche documentaries and anything like that. So I'm really struggling here, and I think the only answer would be the podcast because it is a lot more rare than most people, but David said I can't answer that, so I've kind of let him down a little bit with this answer, but I will have to have a think of that, and maybe somebody ask me that again for episode 219, and I'll see if I've got a better answer. Question number 24. What's your dream supercar? I've never considered like what my dream supercar was, and I actually had to Google to check if the immediate reaction I have to this question was actually classed as a supercar. But James Bond's Aston Martin DB5 was what I went for straight away. I Googled it and it was confirmed it is a supercar in terms of the engine size and how it's classed. But that for me is just quintessential British elegance. It's timeless, it's beautiful, and that in kind of like a nice kind of silver grey would be beautiful. That's what I'll go for. Number 25. Are you more the poet or the warrior archetype? The poet would be creative, expressive, emotive. The warrior is outcome orientated, redacted emotions, and brute power. I feel I try and blend those and bring that to the table. But I think if I was to look at like my natural instincts, a lot of the time it's the warrior in terms of outcome orientated and brute force and just getting it done. I also, when I think of the poet, I don't see myself as instinctively creative. However, I'm absolutely expressive and I've tapped into my emotions when appropriate a lot more over the last few years. So I've worked more on that and I've tried to bring like a balance to the table. And when I was actually Googling this to try and understand more about like maybe types of people or examples I could like, oh, for example, a famous author or a famous sportsman like is a warrior or a poet. I actually Googled and it was saying that the idea of the warrior poet is like the perfect blend of physical, spiritual, and intellectual. And the example they gave was a samurai. So I found that's quite a cool thing for me to emulate. And I definitely think if I'm looking at physically and intellectually, I feel like I'm a blend of like the warrior versus the poet. And then spiritually, I think I've definitely become more awakened in that regard. And I'll probably speak about that more in one of the questions that's coming up. And I think trying to find that blend between the poet and the warrior is probably quite a good thing for men in 2023. Question 26, an easier one. What's been your favourite golf course and why? It's got to be Shiskin on the Isle of Arran. It's a 12-hole golf course and it was the first golf course that I ever played because we used to go on holiday there as a family, a place called Blackwater, the first 2 weeks of July for about 10, 11 years from when we were kids. And we played there on this 12-hole golf course. And it's not just any 12-hole golf course. It's one of the most beautiful, scenic, and like unique golf courses in terms of the layout. And there's like gorse, there's hills, there's cliffs, there's burns to chip over and run over. It's an absolutely beautiful course, and you're right beside the sea. It's absolutely amazing. And those early childhood memories of going there and starting golf was great fun. But the beauty of it was you would go there in July. And then once I got the golf bug at the age of 12, I was playing like all summer when I got back. And then I was playing a little bit before I would, maybe from like Easter time until July time each year when I would go. And each year you would get better and better and better to the extent that you would have improved so much. And you could really measure yourself and remember like, oh, so on the third hole, I used to hit like an 8-iron and not be able to get onto the green, but now I'm hitting like a wedge. I'm hitting on the green. Like for the non-golfers, like it's not that interesting, but for me, I absolutely love the golf course. It's absolutely beautiful. We've been back a couple of times as adults with dad and mum for like dad's birthday. We've been and walked around the golf course with him, and my dad has laughed because he won't have seen us play golf since we were kids and not particularly good. And now Ian and I are both single figure handicaps. We kind of tear the course apart a little bit unless it's really, really windy, because it's not a particularly challenging golf course unless the conditions are challenging. And he's like laughing away, seeing us actually do really well on holes that we used to have to spend hours looking for balls on. So yeah, it was that's probably my favourite golf course, and that's definitely why. Question 27, what are your physique goals now? Will you do a photo shoot or a fitness competition? I think I'm pretty much coasting in maintenance mode when it comes to my physique. I mean, I look good, I feel relatively strong, I'm lifting 5 days a week. There's not really any appetite for me to do a photo shoot, as I've done 2 now, and distance of looking photo shoot ready, or photo shoot ready for me, maybe for the general population, I'm already there. But those 4 to 6 weeks to really get in like the most lethal photo shoot shape that I could, to bring it to that next, to live a little bit more of an extreme life that I maybe don't really want to do, and it doesn't really have that many upsides or benefits for me. And I also don't think, unless I could better the photos that I got in 2019 and 2022, I think it was, I wouldn't be too happy. So for me, there's no real desire to do it at the moment. And fitness competitions, things like high rocks, CrossFit, things like that, I've not really got an interest in that. And if I wanted to do really well in that, I would have to really restructure my training, and I'm not really that fussed for doing that at the moment. And if you were going to make changes to my training and I was going to change my week, the main things I would do is I'd do more boxing training, because that's what I'm enjoying at the moment. I'm enjoying becoming more physically capable. I'm only doing that once a week at the moment. And if I was to change things, I'd maybe reduce down on my weight sessions or change how I'm doing it and do boxing twice a week. So if I'm looking at like physique goals just now, keep looking roughly the same and be a bit better at boxing and try and stay strong and use the gym to be an escape from emails in the day-to-day world. That's the plan. Question number: capture. Are there topics, themes you feel accountable to maintain because of listener feedback? Audience capture is a really interesting concept. I've heard Chris Williamson and I think the chap's name is Gowinder speak about this. Gowinder Bogle, the guy's name is on Twitter. Audience capture is where effectively a creator just dials into what the audience continues to give them feedback on. So say, for example, I had a couple of episodes that were on radically different topics to anything I'd covered before. And those got by far the best feedback, and it got me a load of new subscribers, and it made the channel grow really, really fast. Then audience capture would dictate that even if I wasn't particularly interested in those subjects, that I started to do more of those because it was giving me the positive feedback in terms of downloads. That is a temptation for every single creator. If I look at how I've conducted myself with the podcast, I have conversations that I want to have. I have topics and guests I want to have. And I haven't necessarily been like, oh, I'm going to get loads more downloads if I have this type of conversation and then sold out. I've just focused entirely on having the types of conversations that I want and making sure that I'm pleased with how I conducted those. And if the audience love it, fantastic. The audience slowly with the people that are aligned with my interests and the stuff that I'm creating, then just charge on into sensationalist content. Like, no harm to the podcasts that have done this, but you'll notice I've not really had any like gangsters or ex-drug dealers or ex-murderers on the podcast, which always do mad views for people. But that's never been like something I'm interested in doing. Like, somebody who's got a story about, oh yeah, I was in jail for doing this and now I'm like really reformed, and they tell like the really like gory detail of what they've been up to. That's cool, and I'm all about the redemption story, and that's fantastic. But that sensationalist stuff is not something that I could see myself doing on a weekly basis. And if I was being audience captured, I maybe would see a bump in subscribers from that, because the podcast world tends to love that sort of stuff. Question 29. Have you ever had an addiction to anything, positively or negatively? I think I'm positively addicted to exercise. I love training. I genuinely don't think I've had, apart from when I've been injured, more than 2 weeks off training since I started when I was like 15. So I'm definitely addicted to training. It's mellowed out a little bit in recent years. I used to get quite a lot of angst and anger if my session got disrupted or like moved or changed. But that's calmed down over the last 4 or 5 years, because I've actually learned how important rest is for my body and for my mind. And you actually will train better if sometimes you have that unforced day off that just crops up and you just have to deal with it. So I think I've definitely got an addiction from that perspective to exercise, and that's probably positive. Negatively, I don't know. I don't think I've ever had any like real terrible vices from that regard. Maybe somebody closer to me could say I was maybe negatively like a bit obsessive with my fitness pal for a little while. If, again, it's kind of linked to the whole fitness thing and the control thing. But I'm again a lot more loose with that, and I don't feel like I have to track or weigh anything or everything that I may be used to for a very, very short period of time, because I think personality types like mine can lean into that element of like having total control. And for a short period of time, that was probably really helpful, but that probably lasted 2 to 3 years where I was a bit obsessive about that. But that's now passed, and I do track quite a lot of what I eat, but I'm not worried about having anything that's not on there. So yeah, I don't have I've not got an addictive personality. I've got a bit of a relentless personality and an intense personality sometimes, but I don't think I have any real addictions to battle. Question number 30, and it's the second last one. Who do you see as the biggest online influences for men that are positive? I've got a big bias towards Jordan Peterson. On Wednesday this week, you're going to hear an episode of myself, Chris Burns, and David Hatt, where I speak about some of the rules for life that Jordan wrote about in his first book, and I absolutely love those. And I think Jordan, regardless of your political persuasion, is somebody that gives men a really positive expression of themselves in terms of being a good man rather than for themselves, looks after themselves. So I would say that Jordan Peterson is probably the immediate one that springs to mind for me that's really positive. And a lot of the people that dislike him I really wonder if they've actually listened to his content and what he's got to say. And I think in those private moments, if you were to read his content, and it would be like a kind of blindfold test, like almost like you see these sometimes with like political manifestos. People read the manifestos of all the different political parties, and they're like, "Oh, I really like that one," and then they find out it's a party they absolutely hate. They're like, "Oh no, I can't believe it's the Labour Party or the Conservative Party or whoever it is." I think a lot of the time, if you maybe put forward some of Jordan's ideas and suggestions, and you had somebody like like a, a calm moment, and you didn't tell them who it was, they probably, oh, that sounds quite reasonable. But yeah, I think he's probably someone that stands out. Thing you've changed your opinion on over the course of doing the podcast? So I've mentioned more recently, I've been a little bit more convinced about more whole foods in my diet and less processed foods. But if I was to think about over the course of the podcast, something that's changed over the 3 and a bit years now, I've definitely become more spiritual and more open to the power of things like energy, frequency, how people behave. I am not religious, and I don't necessarily have a faith in that regard. I was christened a Protestant, and I grew up sometimes going to church, but never like enforced upon us. And the school I went to was non-denominational, so we did have a minister that would come in and we would sing hymns at primary school, but it was never like a big thing for me. My family aren't hugely religious, and I think in the future, if I was to get married, I don't think I would be. But I'm definitely more open-minded to the power and the benefits of having spirituality and having a faith that is really connected to the world and appreciating what that means. So for me, I think that's something that's changed over the course of the podcast, having an open-mindedness to maybe there is something out there, or there is definitely other things to consider than just the cold hard facts and the cold hard way that you think about things. And that's evolved through numerous conversations. People like Simon Thomas, for example, people like Chris Reeve, people like Mike Omini, they all played a big role in me being much more open-minded to spirituality and perhaps higher powers or other things. And that's probably from a religious perspective. And I think from a spiritual perspective, somebody more recently like Dr. Arya, that was an incredible conversation, and definitely someone that has a level of spirituality that I could immediately relate to. But if I think about 2019 or 2018, Colin having those conversations, I would be a lot more skeptical. So that's definitely changed over time, and I think there's a lot of merit to that. That is indeed a wrap after 31 questions and a really, really fun podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for your support. Please do leave a 5-star rating if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and do pass on any episode that you really love to a friend. That's how we grow. That's how we keep going. And I'll be back to speak to you all again very, very soon.